Today, we're going to be talking about meditation and solitude. And just to be clear, this is more of an overview conversation, a general conversation. We're not talking about any specific modalities of meditation, just more so the general principle and the benefits and challenges of. And so, Logan, I appreciate it if you could just start off by defining meditation for us in this conversation.
In this conversation, when we talk about meditation, we mean thinking deeply and intentionally about something. That can be breath work. I do consider a form of meditation in this context. You're thinking intentionally about the breath. It can be focusing on your body or inner workings, such as body scan meditation. It can be focusing on something external to help clear the mind of stresses, or just working on distancing yourself from things. It's all intentional mental work.
Absolutely. I'm not sure if you'd rather get into the benefits or challenges first, but coming from someone who constantly struggles with the need to distract myself and have some type of input coming in, what would you say are some of the challenges you foresee in kind of taking on a practice like this and making it a consistent part of one's life and routine?
Well, the number one challenge, I think, for all of us is that it's hard to feel like you're doing anything until you start seeing the benefits.
Mm-hmm.
And because the benefits are things that are not quite tangible,
Mm-hmm.
it's all the harder to observe them. It takes a little longer, I think, to see the change,
Mm-hmm.
unless you're keeping very meticulous journals. So it becomes difficult to not only begin but stick with, because of that seeming inactivity.
Mm-hmm.
What am I even doing here? But it does have benefits.
Okay. Yeah. And so before we kind of jump into those, I just want to kind of concur with what you were saying. I definitely relate to that, and even in the beginning, I had to almost start with like 3 minute periods or 5 minute periods of just trying to, sit alone in silence or breath work, as you said. And, yeah. And so,
No, I started with 5 minutes for the first several years, because the first several years for me, I've always done just at most guided through DVD, CD, something of this nature, and books. I love books as always, but it's difficult to stick with when somebody isn't holding you accountable to it, number one. And number two, they're not showing you what it's doing exactly.
yeah. And those guided meditations were kind of key for me in the beginning as well, because it allowed me to kind of allow myself to be guided by somebody else instead of just sitting there on my own, trying to make myself stay
Right. And
focused.
so, because of that, sitting there on my own and doing it, I would fall off, right? Even if I stuck with it for a couple of weeks, I'd fall off. And then a couple months would go by before I'd realize, oh, wow, when did I stop doing that? So it took a couple of years before I was hitting it regularly for more than just a couple of weeks. And then after that, it took another couple of months before it just became such an integral part of my life that it has to be there in that intentional way. I do like to kind of ponder and, explore mentally when I'm just sitting alone too, which I've had plenty of time to do living in the mountains for a number of summers. But when we're talking about a structured meditation practice, that's a whole nother matter.
Okay. And I appreciate that we added solitude in here separately, as I kind of had this preconceived notion even that meditation was, a very specific, very isolating type of monk-like practice. And so kind of breaking down some of those preconceived notions, but also I think just talking about some of the importances of solitude in general is pretty huge. So if you could, maybe let's just go into the benefits of meditation, and we'll dive into solitude.
Certainly. Well, first, let's address how these all benefits of meditation can be present when you are in a group. Also, that there are forms of meditation that you even may be aware of but don't necessarily classify as meditation by default. By our definition here today, they are meditation. Things like prayer, that's a form of meditation. You pray with other people. So meditation practices can be done in groups with other people. Monks have practiced in groups in different parts of the world for thousands of years. So these do not have to be solitary practices. And some of them, such as mantra work, let's say, which done thoroughly, I think definitely has a mental and meditative practice to it, because you're repeating it not just verbally, but in your mind, right? So intention, that's a meditative practice. Those are done, as we can see in movies, although of course I'm sure that's not exactly how it's done, but it is done in groups of people chanting of mantras, chanting koans, chanting, depending on what culture you're in, what you'll call it. But that's done in groups as well. So you don't need to do it alone. And it doesn't need to be silent for you to do it. Those things can help. But even without it, it has all of the great benefits that meditation comes with, right? Things like stress reduction, anxiety and depression being reduced or just more manageable if still present. Enhanced cognitive function, from improved attention spans to memory retention to just overall cognitive function. And also your mental resilience, your mental toughness is shown to improve as well. Your physical, and honestly, before we move on to physical benefits, I would argue that in particular, the mental resilience, mental toughness aspect may be one that is actually improved more when you're not in solitude. You have things you have to, you know, discipline yourself to not be distracted by even more than just focus on. I would imagine that probably has even greater benefits for the mental resilience.
Mm.
But then we have physical benefits. Believe it or not, meditation does help with things like pain management, improved recovery. To explain that a little more, it helps improve recovery because, again, it has done all these other things, which in turn reduces the tension throughout your muscles in your body, allowing them to recover quicker.
Mm-hmm.
And then general physiological benefits that again stem from that same origin, things like lower blood pressure, reduced inflammation, and improved immune function.
Yeah, and so why don't we just kind of dive into solitude the same way and just kind of define it and expand on it a little bit here first.
Okay. When we're talking about solitude, what we're talking about is being alone. And in my opinion, true solitude is also quiet. Now, I know today, if you're living in a city or something, that's not true. And I would still consider, alone in your apartment solitude.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the same level. I just want to be clear, as if it was dead silent and let's say you had your walls soundproofed or something, that would definitely be an improved version, but that doesn't mean it's not solitude.
Mm. Okay.
It really just means being alone, undistracted. Intentionally, I would argue, especially in our context here today, undistracted, meaning there are no screens going either. So even if you're alone, but screens are going, radio's blasting, bright lights are on for some reason, and those aren't happening. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Your environment is settled. You're
Right.
in a quiet, calm environment. For our purposes here, that is what we mean by solitude.
And you said something a little earlier before a conversation that kind of stuck with me. You made the comment of something to the effect of chosen solitude. And I kind of think about cultivating an idea around solitude. I know for me, for a long time, that was not the ideal. Solitude was very difficult for me. Being alone and with myself was tough. And so, yeah, I've really had to cultivate this idea that those times of solitude are cherished. They are to be valued and really respected. And so it's really been a 180 shift for me on kind of my views of that and how important it is. So let's kind of talk about some of the major challenges of that as well that we face.
I've always disliked time with other people, so I don't really know what the challenges. You tell me, man. What are the
Well,
challenges of
um,
solitude?
I'll speak as someone, with certain types of trauma that at their core made me feel broken and not okay with myself and the way that I operated in the world.
Oh, I
And
can definitely understand that. Okay. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so, I spent a lot of time, I guess, to put it simply, running from myself as opposed to cultivating and creating myself into something that didn't have to be run away from. And so, I think for me, one of those big challenges was just learning how to accept myself, what I'd been through, and the fact that I was just doing the best that I could, and that was okay.
Okay. Well, let me then, if I may,
Mhm.
not say to you or anybody else as a doctor or any kind of, this is not medical guidance, but just personal opinion, experience. I've been through, plenty of terrible shit. So I definitely understand what you're talking about and not liking yourself.
Mhm.
And so what I'm going to say here is not just to you. These are kind of the things that held me together on myself when I was, for instance, that was a big part of me wanting to be in solitude alone in the woods because I felt that way and that wasn't cool with me. My version was go to the fucking woods alone and face it.
Mhm.
Um, and that's because underneath that, I really do believe that I'm not going to say there are no, but it is the incredibly rare person that is truly a piece of garbage in their soul.
Agreed.
Okay. So, like, a lot of that stuff you're not good with.
Mhm.
I'm not saying you didn't do things that weren't right. I didn't do, I know at points there were things that weren't necessarily right. I also know there at those moments I really didn't have any right options,
Mhm.
right? And even if you did, do what you got to do to make peace with it. You know,
Mhm.
there are occasionally, and mostly, in my opinion, honestly, it's more things I've said that unintentionally that I have regretted than actions. I've been pretty intentional, I feel, with a lot of actions over the years,
Mhm.
even when I was younger. But words are a different story. Do what you have to make peace with that, because on I believe and I hope this may help someone, but you're not garbage in your soul, right? You're not a garbage person. You may have done shit things,
Mhm.
but you're not a bad person. People may not forgive you for it. You just have to do what you've got to do to get right with it, and then do what you have to do to maintain that rightness with it and yourself. And the only way to do that is to go into the solitude, is to face yourself. But do it knowing you're not, all those things you're feeling bad about, they happen, but that doesn't make you shit for them. As long as, again, you do what you need to make it right. It doesn't
Right.
mean disregarding it. It doesn't mean saying, so what, that never happened, or oh, get the fuck over it. I have now, or something like that. It's like,
Mhm.
yes, I did that. I absolutely did that. Are we gonna be able to move past it? Yes, cool. No, goodbye. And we both, I hope, again, goodbye, not as in I hate you. Goodbye as in I hope we can both find peace then for whatever it is that we can't find peace for when we're around.
Right. Yeah. And I think, that's one thing that solitude and meditation really brought for me is that time. And it happens quite often that I'll be just kind of processing and contemplating on things, and stuff like that comes up, things that I've done in the past or things that were done to me in the past that brought that belief on. But, it's given me the understanding, and it wasn't even necessarily because of my actions that I felt that way, but it was the fact that, I acted out of ignorance. Because this was done to me, it created these views of myself, and I really just did the best I could to cope with it, So yeah, I have done some things that I'm not proud of, but I think that's the thing right there is now, instead of ignoring them or blaming them on something, I'm able to accept that. Yeah, I did some shitty stuff and I'm not proud of it, but guess what? I'm here. I'm here
Yeah.
and I'm working through
And
it.
also, I want to say this, if you're over 18, like I know both of us are here, right? Honestly, and this goes not just, and this isn't anybody younger than 18, this is not a free flag to do whatever the fuck you want to do either. But once you're over 18, especially once you and whoever you're dealing with is over, like, let's say 25, there's been years since you were really a kid, right?
Mm-hmm.
You were a kid.
Right.
Honestly, you're supposed to mess up when you're a kid.
Mm-hmm.
That's how you learn. That's how every human since the beginning of time has learned. Like, if you were upset over something you did when you were a kid, you were a kid. You were supposed to. Did you learn from it? Should be the real thing. If you didn't learn from it, then maybe you do need to feel a little bad because you keep messing up in the same damn way. Learn.
Yeah, and I think, meditation, solitude, they kind of open the door to be able to go back and view some of these things, in that contemplation and sitting with yourself, and you see it from a different perspective, to go back and look at events of my childhood and see myself in that small, vulnerable state, it was really eye-opening for me. Like, I'm thinking of myself as an adult and I should have done this, I should have done that. Why'd I do this? But that wasn't the real picture at the time, So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yep.
absolutely.
And I'm sure, I don't know about yourself, but for me, I look back on that and there is definitely an influence of, like, I look at it that way because I had to kind of be an adult. I had to make adult
Yep.
decisions. I was dealing with adult problems. But
Exactly.
in reality, I was a kid, which is, by the way, if that's true for you, as it was for us at points, right? All the more reason to forgive yourself because you were a kid
Mhm.
having to make adult decisions. Who could possibly make all right decisions?
Exactly. Yeah. Right.
Especially if you didn't really have good adults to base those decisions off of.
Right. And I think that's kind of the thing. We've talked a bit on trauma in our own conversations, and most of the time, trauma doesn't happen when you have those healthy support systems around as a child. Because you're able to talk through it and be open about it, and you don't have to hide these experiences and then figure out how to deal with them in your child mind. So yeah. Let's talk about how these two things kind of go hand in hand and benefit each other when they're put together.
Absolutely. The biggest thing is that their benefits are almost mirror images of one another.
Hmm.
And so when you put them together, those benefits are just so much more.
Hmm.
Not more variety, just so much more of a benefit. If you're, let's say, doing it to build attention, you're going to build attention a lot faster doing meditation in solitude,
Hmm. Right.
as an example.
Okay. Definitely. Yeah. Okay.
But otherwise, all of the benefits, for meditation that I listed earlier, and
Hmm.
all of the ones for solitude, which if I didn't list earlier, that, like I said, they're almost mirror images.
Hmm.
They're enhanced self-reflection, self-awareness, and problem solving, and improved attention and focus and memory retention, improved emotional and cognitive regulation and function, your learning and personal growth generally increases when you do both of these things. And it both also, if approached willingly, reduce your cognitive load rather than increase it, which almost everything in life increases it. Even if you're just listening to your music on your headphones, most of the time is increasing it. Again, I say most of the time, figuring you're not using your music as therapy every day in the sense of helping you deal with loss and things like that kind of therapy. Not, I get everybody uses it to get through their day. That's not what we mean here. I mean dealing with deep emotional problems. When you're listening to the stuff that you just bop along to all day, that's different, and that's actually stimulating more than it is stress relieving.
Right. Right.
When you're watching TV, any screen really, even this here, the screen, the lights, all this, the way your eyes have to, stressful.
Mm-hmm.
It adds to the stress, to the cognitive overload, to all of this.
Definitely.
So to do these two things together that actually reduce it is great.
Definitely.
And probably the biggest talked about benefit of both, honestly.
Okay.
How they allow you to de-stress is what I'm referring to.
Right. I'm going to add some personal experience here. I find that for myself, there is a almost barrier, and that means when I go to meditate or it's meditation time, there is usually an initial period, maybe 30 seconds, a minute, maybe longer, that I do kind of have to fight a little bit on it. And there is a little bit of increased stress. I want to be doing something, I want to be up and moving. My body doesn't want to sit here. But I will say, if you could break through that barrier, just getting started, that is the biggest step. So.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong here, but if you add in to the beginning of any meditation what we went through now that I've taught you in terms of intentionally matching your thoughts to your breath, that's giving you a very subtle but still action thing. You're doing something. So it helps to cope with that. What am I doing here? I'm not doing anything. Blah, 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 blah.
Right.
Well, you're matching this. See this intention here? See how you're controlling yourself? That's physical. You're controlling your physicality right now. See that? See the effect? It's bringing your mind calmer. You're connecting with yourself. Now you're ready to connect with yourself. Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I will say, that is something that you taught me recently, just the engaging the mind in that physiological control is really huge for me. Yeah, because it does kind of help shut that switch off of what am I doing? I need to be doing this. So yeah, I think that is a great tool right there for sure. All right. So yeah, as we kind of wrap up here, is there any challenges or action steps or questions that you'd like to throw out there for our audience?
Let me know how it goes. Give it a try, right? Start by matching your thoughts with your breath, the exhale and the inhale, and then just head into some form of meditative practice. There are guided ones on YouTube all over the place, where we have one at least on our website right now and some articles, and let us know how it goes.
Absolutely. I totally concur with that. We love to hear from you guys. We truly value your support and your opinions, your thoughts. And so, wishing you progress on your path and good health throughout your day. This is the Marshall Forest